what I've got in front of us here is what I'll try and work my way through. But first and foremost, as I always say, it's just a huge thank you for just giving up your time. I really mean that. I just can't believe that people come on a call to try and make a difference, and hopefully we'll see why I think that by the time we get to the end. But I always just really admire people who come on a call like this just to try and help us make a little bit of a difference. These are the kind of areas that I'll speak about. I'll speak about the kind of dyslexia. I'll speak about a bit about superpower. I won't go into what dyslexia is, because that would be remiss of me not knowing that everybody on this call probably knows a lot about it. But I'll try and talk a little bit about what it means to me, or what it means to that kind of dyslexic community, and what we've tried to achieve. I'll talk a little bit about Mission Superhero, because Mission Dyslexia as a book has been a long time in progress. It hasn't just appeared as something we just created. It's been a long journey based on a lot of hard work, particularly through Lena and a lot of people who are at Dyslexia Scotland, and a lot of probably people who are on this call have potentially helped along that way. And then I'll speak a little bit about the book and the journey of that, and then how to kind of use it. And that's not to say that there's a right or a wrong. It's just to kind of give you an idea of how we thought it would be set up, and take it from there. The part you can see in the slide there is probably something that I mentioned to a lot of people. This was a dream that was in my head. And I thought, I wonder if it can become a reality. I say it to a lot of people. I wish I'd never put my hand up sometimes, because it took a lot of hard work, but it's been a lot of real good stuff. So sometimes you just got to dream, and sometimes in children's heads, they've just got to kind of unlock that bit of potential that you have. And sometimes nobody sees it apart from yourself. And that was the whole journey that we've went on with this particular book. So why do we do it? Why do I sit here in front of you? There's a whole host of reasons of why I do it. One of my colleagues there, Rossi Stone, who's a close friend of mine, both Rossi and I are dyslexic. And I think we've always been trying to champion that bit about change. How can we then go and change society to make it much more appreciative of what dyslexia brings? I never talk about dyslexia as a negative. I talk about it as a massive positive and a massive opportunity to help change people's lives. And that's brought about with just the journey I've been on, but that journey has been fraught with difficulty. And I think if we can help young people in society grow, particularly those maybe with a learning difference, or particularly with dyslexia, we can make a massive difference. My wife, Joey, is a writer, and she believes in trying to change how people perceive learning. She's a great believer in books, and she's always kind of disadvantaged because my two children are dyslexic, and she always says, why can't you all be the same? Why do I know all these dyslexic people and they're all different? But she understands, and she works with people who, in terms of learning differences, because she sees the potential in people, and she wants to try and open that bit up. So that's why we do it. We do it because we believe we can make a difference. And that was the kind of journey that we've been on as a family and as friends and as everything else, to try and create this bit of positivity. I only ever put this slide up, and really the reason I put it up is just to make you think as we speak about this. And I always put this up just to make us think, what does dyslexia mean to you? And it's not maybe about the definition of it, but what impact is it having? What impact does it have on people's lives? What impact does it have on society? And if we look at the research, so many of the great inventors and so many of the great people in our society are dyslexic. And there's a reason that is. And maybe we have to change the way we perceive learning to allow more people to flourish. And who do we know that's dyslexic? Whether or not that's our friends or families, and maybe we have to talk about that. And that's the reason these challenges. I've been very fortunate to be an ambassador with Dyslexia Scotland for over 10 years. And in that journey, I find more and more people now opening up and starting to speak about it. I mean, you ask them why you open up, they say, well, because you keep talking about it, so I'm not as frightened anymore. And I think that's what I'm trying to put over. I think people need to own their dyslexia. So I just say that just to maybe make us think about it not being a negative. There's so much positivity out there a bit about what dyslexia is and what we can do to make a difference. So as Lena says, I want to kind of put this into kind of 4 or 5 chapters as we kind of move through over the next 30 minutes or so, just in terms of where we go. So the chapters will be: where did we start? What did the book? Why did we make the book? And how do we kind of use that? So there's a bit of chapter form in here. So the journey, as I say, was in my head. What you see in terms of this image was just something that didn't exist. This image in front of you didn't exist. These characters never existed. Mission Dyslexia never existed. And it's quite remarkable how we've got to this point and where we've created some of this particular stuff. So this was one of the reasons that we did it. I grew up, I started school in 1979. And that whole 10-year, my journey to me leaving school in 1990 just was horrible. I didn't know anybody else that was dyslexic. Never met anybody my whole school journey. Found it horrible. Didn't know anybody who had the challenges I had. And I've always believed that if you can't see something, you can't be it. You have to put yourself out there and say, this is the journey I'm going to go on. And I have to keep saying, I'm dyslexic. I'm proud to be dyslexic. I don't mind my mistakes. And I think I can make a difference. And the more people that say that, the more people get confident enough to go and do that. And that's the part that we have to do for children. And I look at that from my 2 children. My daughter in particular is brilliant. She owns her dyslexia like I've never met anybody else in my life, and just shrugs her shoulders and says, Dad, I'm dyslexic, I'll get there. And my son's finding it a wee bit tricky. He's transitioning into secondary school, found that a little bit more tricky, and just in terms of the pressure that comes on that. But my daughter she just knows she can do things differently, and she has never stressed. Mum and Dad stress a hell of a lot over her. She doesn't, and she's remarkable. And she's got a tutor who's within our dyslexia community who is supporting her through this journey as well. And she's just a remarkable creature, but she sees it because she goes, yeah, but Dad's dyslexic and he seems to be okay. Little does she know that I'm not that okay, but as long as she doesn't ever realise that her dad's not that funny when she's older. So there was always a dream. There was always a dream that we had and what we wanted to do in this kind of journey, because it didn't exist. So I'm now talking 7 years ago nearly. This did not exist. None of what I'm talking about existed. And we wanted to have this bit of a dream that could you be successful? Could we look at that being successful? What does that mean? And could we and do that? Could we look at this kind of mission superhero idea that we had? But underneath that bit of mission superhero was we wanted to talk about that power of positivity, that real power of positivity. And it kind of led into the kind of bit about Mission Dyslexia. And all of it was underpinned with 2 main things. One, could we make it interactive? Could we make everything really interactive? That was the most important thing to us. When we spoke to anybody who was dyslexic, they said, can you make things interactive for us? Not telling us, but engaging us, making us part of the journey, please. And can we do that? And we thought about that as we kind of created this journey in this world that we wanted to create. We wanted to make it so interactive that young people would then go, wow, I get what you're trying to do. And the one big thing that we started this whole journey was we wanted to bring dyslexia to life. We wanted to make young people and adults go, that's dyslexia. I understand it now. I can kind of touch and feel it. And that was a whole journey. So if we could then get young people to go and say, that's what dyslexia is, then that was the journey we wanted to go on. And it was going to be a huge journey. So we started off, and it's a huge credit to Lena, to everybody else within Dyslexia Scotland, because Mission Superhero was just a dream. It was just something we just thought, we can do this. And we sat down and we said, right, okay, we're going to go and we're going to go to a number of local authorities and we're going to deliver something. And somebody said, what are you going to deliver? I said, we've no idea, but we'll create it. And we created Mission Superhero. And as you see there, this was between Rossi and I. We sat down and we thought, let's go into primary schools, but let's do something different. And the whole idea about that was, having done numerous workshops, numerous talks for dyslexia over a period of time, I always felt guilty. I always get in my car after doing a school talk or doing something at a workplace and thought, have I made a difference? And I thought, no, I haven't. What I've done is I've went in there and I've said, Paul McNeill's been on a journey, but I've not left anybody with anything. I've not left them with a resource or made a difference to their life. And the whole idea behind Mission Superhero was we thought there was a bit of a triangle. We thought there was 3 important component parts. One being the teachers, which is the biggest resource we have. And underneath the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit, we've got a lot of good resources in there. And we thought if we can upskill teachers and help that community understand all the toolkits they've got, we've got a chance. But then could we do something interactive with children to make them believe and link the 2 together? That was one of the purposes. And then could we add the 3 together, which was parents? So we always believed that we had to engage with parents as well to say, this is what dyslexia means. Do you want to enter into that community? Here's the support structure and everything that goes round about it. So over the piece from 2017 to 2019, we engaged with all these local authorities. We delivered these workshops to everybody we're talking about, and we delivered to nearly over 1,000 people. And it was quite remarkable walking into schools and just getting this amazing feedback from young people, from parents, from teachers about things that we could do to make a difference, to make a real fundamental difference. And again, we started to see some things dropping out of that. We started to see some schools engaging with the toolkits we had, the way the workshops were delivered. Some of the phenomenal feedback we got from schools was quite remarkable. I put Conway Primary School up here that you probably see on the left-hand side. It was one of the first workshops we ever done to children and to adults. So we delivered the children's one, and we went in the evening to do the adults one. And I delivered as adults workshop, and it was really, really good, really, really powerful. Number of people within in there, and I always remember it, and I still get emotional thinking about it to this day. A parent put her hand up in one of the front rows when we were doing the question and answer. She was I think she had a child in P3, P4 roughly, and she said, "I'm really struggling. I don't know how I'm going to get through it, Paul. What you've done there is brilliant. What can I do?" And one of the parents at the back says, "Don't worry, I'm in Pre-7. We'll speak after it. I'll get a cup of coffee and I'll guide you through it. Don't worry. Your child's going to be okay." And it was just this remarkable moment that we created a community in a school that we're all going to help each other. And I just thought, do you know something? This is remarkable. And we've seen a lot of good things around about how young people have bought into that, how they bought into the dyslexia champions. We went back to some of the schools, and it's just been a remarkable journey that we've been on. Huge thanks. And I know Lena never takes the credit, and she always says, "No, I never done that." But Lena did. It was what she took was what we then created on our Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit. So if you go on the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit, all the resources are here. We turned something that was a dream in my kitchen into an interactive thing on a website that you can download all the resources. There's video content. It's quite remarkable what we've done. I can't take very much credit for this. It was an idea, and then everybody else kind of came round about and built the part for me. But what I would do is encourage you to go in, because there's lots of video content in here. There's a lot of downloadable resources. There's a lot of way that you can interact and help. And still to this day, I go on and I think, wow, what did we create in terms of a journey and a resource? So that kind of gives you a part of the journey that we kind of went on. We then moved into the kind of world of Mission Dyslexia, and I speak about this about how we could raise awareness and what were the positivities that we could do to make a difference. So when we were talking about the Addressing Dyslexia toolkit, we wanted to then kind of take this on a book, and I think what I always kind of say to a lot of people in this one here is that we wanted to try and just create a book. And I always say, I went along to Dyslexia Scotland's education conference, and I was asked to deliver the workshop on Mission Superhero, and we did it. And I go back to say that my wife wanted to be a writer. She wanted to write a book. It was her childhood dream that she wanted to write a book. She spent years trying to create this dream and try to do it. And Rossi and I delivered the workshop, and as we came out, somebody approached us at the end of the workshop and said, "By the way, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. I know what you're doing. I've heard a lot about it. By the way, that can be a book. Let's make it into a book." And it was somebody from JKP Publishers, and they said, "Look, I'll phone you next week and let's just make this into a book." I went up the road and said to my wife, who'd spent the last 20 years trying to be a writer and trying to get a book, "I think we've got a book deal." And she went, "You don't get a book deal like that, Paul. That doesn't happen." And I said, "Well, somebody's going to phone us next week and we're going to get a book deal." And lo and behold, we did. And that was it. And it's just been this remarkable journey. I'll come back to my three friends and my arch enemy in a minute, but this was the world we created. What we wanted to then do was take this bit of the world and create these manifestations, these particular characters that we could engage with children and say to children, look, don't be frightened. Don't be frightened as friends. You've got friends out there. Not only have you got me and you've got other people, you've got these comic book friends. And we started to see a world in which you could do, and we've got an arch enemy, Mr. Despicabilia, that we wanted to create to make sure that people could point to something and go, because if you can see it and you can point to it, you can defeat it. And that was the whole essence. So in about 4 weeks' time, Mission Dyslexia is 2 years old, believe it or not. And it's still, I still cry emotional tears every time I get something in, because I kind of go, this was a daft idea that is still going and going and going. And that's because there's a community that has just been really remarkable. And I think I put a few of these things up just to give you a context of the journey, because there's so many people I've never met. I've never met a lot of the people that are on these particular tweets or on these particular photos. I've never met them in my life. So the young person you can see right now, I don't know who that is. I've no idea. I've no idea. They tweet out, they tagged us in it, and they said, look, this is a young person using the Dyslexia comic book, and look, and I think you just look at the smile and you just think, do you know something? That's certainly a young person that's trying to make a difference in his life. And it's just always been that emotion that comes over you about the success. We always go and I take some of the quotes out, and if you see this quote, the reason I took it out is it was from a retired teacher, and I think it is summed up about what the things, it's about the characters, about the interactive, and I can't take much of the credit, because all of the things come from listening to young people, and particularly my daughter. My daughter said, Dad, see, whatever you create, it has to be colourful and it has to be interactive. If it's not colourful and it's not interactive, I ain't reading it. And she was right. She was utterly right in what she thought. But that was because we asked an 8-year-old what she thought about dyslexia, and we took what she thought and we took what other young people had told us, and it just started to come to life slightly. Again, I'm only going to touch on these guys, and it's really just to give you this kind of idea about the journey, about that journey, and about what people have thought about it. So if I go left to right, that I look, again, another young person, and I think when somebody says that they're rocking their dyslexia, I just love that. I just think that's just something I just want that to be more. So I don't think that I can speak any more than the picture that says that young person with a big massive smile on their face. They just look really happy. They're using the book, they're using the interactive resources, and they're going and doing it. The one in the middle is a school in London. I've never been to the school in London. I've never interacted with the school in London. I keep tweeting them. I keep direct messaging them saying, do you want any help? They say, no, Paul, your book's brilliant. We're quite happy. Thank you. And they keep using it. And they use it with all the downloadable resources. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And they keep using it as their school resource. And the one thing I'm going to pause on there is, this was never designed to be an education resource. It was designed to help a parent. That was the whole crux of it. But everybody that comes back to us says, this is a great resource. It's a great resource to use in classrooms, to use with young people, to build confidence. The last one in the top right, as I'm looking, is one that just blows us away. This is a school in America. This is the Odyssey School in America. And they've adopted Mission Dyslexia now, and starting to roll out across more parts of America as their interactive resource that they use in their classrooms. And you can see there they continually use it. They use it every year, and they just say that it's really good. And the one thing I'll tell you about this one is that when we delivered this workshop the very first time, the school, Kate, the teacher, said, "Oh, you come on and just help us with the parents' night." The parents want to come, and all the children want to show off all their drawings. Now, I forgot, because I'm dyslexic sometimes, that there's a massive time difference. So she emailed me, she says, no problem, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I went, oh my God. So I went on, and of course, the brilliant thing about Zoom or any other things is sometimes you forget to mute. So they forgot to mute us, so we couldn't hear them. And one of the parents I could hear still in the background said, I cannot believe you've got these authors on that. This is unbelievable. And I'm sitting at my kitchen table at 1 o'clock in the morning in Glasgow going, are they for real? We're a nobody. But it was just the impact that it had across the ocean that you kind of went, wow, that's just remarkable. few other things that we've done. It's been recognised in the Scottish Parliament, and last year we won an award for one of the best education resources as well. So it's been a remarkable journey, a hugely remarkable journey that we go on, and I'm really humble about that, because I think, you know, something, it started out as a daft idea, but we listened to people and it's starting to help change. The one bit I want to spend the next maybe 5-10 minutes on here is just talking you through slightly how the book is kind of used. So as Lena says, you might have a book. What a lot of people kind of think is, well, what do I do with it? And when we launched it at first, there was a bit of, well, what do I do? And I used to go back to a lot of parents and say, just sit down and read. Just read this with your child. That's all you're wanting to do is just allow them an opportunity to have a bit of freedom. But there's so many interactive parts in here. So there's different sections on different topic areas that you can do. There's one part in here that I think is always really important, and I think it's halfway through, and it tells you about, it's page 14, it's on it. So anything that's got a tick at the top bit of the page can be downloadable on JKP's page. So what I didn't realise this until a lot of the schools then fed back to me. They were like, we're just downloading all these resources. Are we allowed to do that? And I says, absolutely, yeah. Yes, you can have the book, and then you can download certain parts of it. Yes, so you can have books for everybody in the class, or you can just use this as the reference part and then download all the other parts that are on it. So every part in here is able to be downloaded. And that was the journey we wanted to go on it. So what we've said to every school is that have a think. How do you interact with young people? How do we do that? So the whole concept and the idea behind that was to take the part of the book and say, right, okay, there's a journey to go on. There's a journey to go on with the young people to make them create something for themselves. And that was the whole idea. So parts of the first part of it is them about just discovering what dyslexia is and understanding what it is. And then there's parts in the book that you'll probably see yourself that give you kind of wee bits of ideas. So the characters are talking, and that was so important for everybody who talked about us during this journey. They got people that they could then go and look to. It wasn't MD who was rich and famous. It was just this comic book character who could say, look, this is what I think about visual thinking. And then as you go through the kind of journey in the book, the spaces to do. So this is Mr. Despicabilia's hat, for example, and the whole idea is writing things down, because if you can write them down or you can put them into bits, you can then start to think, well, how can I walk through them? So what you'll probably see within the book is that we never ever say that you can beat Mr. Despicabilia. We never claim that. What you'll probably see in the book is we get them smaller. So the more times we can come up with coping strategies, we can squash. We can make Mr. Despicabilia smaller. We can make the voice go away, and that's what we want to try and do. So we talk a lot about them. So the one you can see on your screen at the moment in time is about time. So time is something that a lot of people don't think about dyslexia about. So there's still a kind of traditional thought process, and I know a lot of people on the call won't think this way, but it's just more about what the general public think, is that dyslexia is still a little bit about writing and reading. If that was only challenges I had in my life, I'd be absolutely delighted. But time is one of those crucial things, because it's a working memory and it's a processing. So what we try to do is come up with this, how do you think about time? And the reason behind that, and I'll give you a little bit of context in this, the learning we had from doing Mission Superhero and working with all the schools was quite remarkable. So we had a toolkit. We used to get young people to draw. We used to get them to do things. And we used to get them to create comic book characters and come up and tell us what they were doing, whether or not that was imaginative ideas or whether or not that was just a comic book characters. And I always remember this 10-year-old girl in one of the schools we were working with came up and she'd invented a watch. She said, I've invented this watch that if I hit my watch, time freezes. For everybody else, everybody stops apart from me, and I can catch up. And it was just brilliant the way she'd thought it through. The drawing was really good. It was really colourful, and so on and so forth. So she's standing up, and everybody's going, that's brilliant. What a brilliant drawing. And we're all just about to give her a round of applause to say thank you, and you go and take your seat, and we'll get the next person up. And she went, yeah, but I've got one of those watches. And I remember looking across the room to the teacher, to Rossi, and to me thinking, did she just say she's got a watch that stops time? And she went, yeah, I have. I can stop time. And I remember thinking, how am I going to explain to a 10-year-old she cannot stop time? So, of course, we went, right, okay, you've said that. How do you stop time then? And she went, well, what I do is I start my stopwatch whenever I'm having to do something that's in a time frame. So if she's got a bit of a test, or she's got to do reading a certain time, or something she has to do, and she says, if I'm really struggling and I'm getting a little bit anxious, I stop my stopwatch. And she said, time stands still. She said, I know the clock on the school is the time. She says, but for me, it allows me to calm down. And she says, it allows me to then kind of think. And I just went, oh my goodness, that is unbelievable. And the teacher went, how long have you been doing that for? She says, 2 years. So she had learned a coping strategy that could defeat dyslexia, wouldn't take it out. She was always going to struggle, but she'd learn a coping strategy. I just thought it was a remarkable way. So we stole her idea and we put it in the book. So if she's never got the copyright for that, unfortunately. But the whole idea around about that is to use the book to walk the young person through what are the things you find difficult, what are the challenges, but more importantly, what are your strengths? What are the really, really good things that you've got? And these are the things that we kind of talk about. So when we kind of do it, what is dyslexia to a young person? So when you're talking about those challenges, these are some of the ones. And then none of these are from me. These have been from the youth ambassadors or some of the people that we met in the journey throughout it. And some of them are just about that tweaking, that pulling that wee thread, as they say, just trying to get into a young person's mind and saying, well, write down, what do you find difficult? What do you find? Is it the noise? Is it just the processing? A lot of young people say, I can't copy things down quick enough. A lot of young people say, I can't understand the question. That is my son's biggest challenge as he transitioned into secondary school. We thought we got as much scaffolding round about him as we could, but trying to break down the question has become his biggest challenge. And we're having to work with him as best as we can to find new coping strategies from primary school into secondary school about understanding the content of the question or the information that come over. And that's really important. So the sections in the book, the space in here to start writing them down. So whether or not you download it and you say, well, what are all your strengths? But what are the challenges and how do we overcome those particular challenges? And then, as we say, it's about them moving that in to trying to break them down. So what we did in the book was we trying to come up with different ideas. So one of the things that young people find difficult sometimes is breaking words down. I still don't understand phonics. I really struggle with spelling. Well, in fact, I'm 48 years of age and I still can't spell. Right? I can't spell. And everybody laughs and they say, no, you can't spell. I can't spell, right? And the reason I say that, and the reason I say it with a wee bit of confidence is my wife has got a master's degree in English literature and she understands the English language like nobody else. And she says, yeah, but do you not understand the workings of the... And I'm going, no. She said, can you sound it out? I said, no, I can't hear it. I can't hear sounding out. So what we try to do is come up with ideas about how you could break words down, but in a creative way. But what we realise is that might be a big, massive quantum step for a young person. So the one in the left-hand side that I'm looking at the moment in time was what Rossi thought was, well, we'll put a bit in there. So it gives young people an idea of a starter. So that's word breaker. So it's imagine this big superhero who can break words into bits. And that then allows young people to visualise it. And then they can maybe then link that onto something else that they would then want to draw themselves. So they might come up with it in a different way. And the whole idea about that is to walk the way through and to start to get them to create their own coping strategy. So if you can start to imagine, they've downloaded it, they've got all their positivity, they've got all their challenges, and then they're starting to create their own coping strategies. And their own coping strategies will change in their journey throughout education. So it might be, well, I need a bit of word breaker, but I've learned a different way of doing that. So I'll rip that up and I'll put something new in. Or I need advice on how I'm going to get the question answered to me, or how I'm going to perceive the question, or do I need to slow the question down? Some of the ideas that young people come up with are more about them just having that bit to visualise, and that's something that's really important. So whether or not that's they're coming out with a megaphone mouth, because some people don't want to ask for help. So if they can do that, then they've got the confidence maybe just to speak, because they're maybe speaking quietly, but at least they can get the message out. And if they can write that down, then they can start to write down how they potentially go through it. What we then did was we then created these characters, and these characters are designed to think about dyslexia in a variety of different ways. That was the whole idea behind it. How could we think about characters that relate to dyslexia, but also relate to how they think? So if you think about it, this is Persisto. Although my dyslexia, I had him as Posterior. So for a year and a half, I kept calling him Posterior until Rossi stepped in one day and said, "You do know he's called Persisto, Paul?" I went, "Is he? I thought he was Posterior." I just pronounced it that way. I hadn't listened to Rossi when he wrote it down at first. But the whole idea behind this character is the idea about you just keep going. And a lot of people just do keep going. And we want to then use this character about asking for help. So sometimes you can be so determined that you get embarrassed. And when we use this character in terms of any of the workshops we do or anything we look in the book, it's about the embarrassment about asking for help. So you might want to move something that's really heavy. And if you've got male ego like me, you're never going to ask MD. You just think you can lift anything as heavy as it can be and you don't ask for help. But what you have to do is get over that embarrassment. So maybe that's that writing that down for that young person. That, yeah, I do need to ask for help and I don't need to be embarrassed. But what we found a lot of schools doing really, really well throughout using the book and the resources that we've created is creating the environment to allow you to ask for help. That dyslexia is not seen as something that's awkward or something else. It's just somebody else needs to learn in a different way. And that's fantastic for us as well. Rossi said when we done this, we had to have a comic book dog. He said you can't create characters if you don't have a comic book dog. So we have Wilforce. But Wilforce was more about this caring. That's why it's got that big long tail. It's that idea about giving you a cuddle. Just that idea about you just need somebody somewhere just to sometimes believe in you, and just that relaxing nature and going, do you know something? I'm not feeling really good. And a lot of people, that's what they are. They're a lot of people who are dyslexic got that a lot of empathy. They might not have the big academic bit, but they can think something that bit of emotional intelligence. And sometimes you just don't believe in yourself. The big bit in here about is that finding that bit to organise yourself. And that's the whole concept about writing things down and making lists. For me, going into university, I really struggled because I couldn't work out how to organise my day. So we've started to think about ways in which you can do that. So, for example, one of the tricks that we use for my son is everything's colour-coded. His timetable's colour-coded, his books and his folders are colour-coded according to his timetable, because he finds organisation just overwhelming. And for a lot of dyslexic people, that can be, their day can be so overwhelming. And I find that with my own daughter, but I also find that with everybody I work with as I've went into schools with this. The 3 steps sometimes can be so overwhelming. Can you go down the corridor and pick up that thing from that teacher? Always, sometimes a dyslexic person will struggle with is to put them in chronological order, but also go, I didn't hear you after you said walk down the corridor. But they might not ask for help, so they walk down the corridor and they get there and they go, I don't know why I'm here. So how do you organise your day and how do you organise your time and how do you work out coping strategies with that? Creation, again, is that bit about being able to see things differently. And sometimes it's about that, just that ability to be able to think, well, how do I use my creativity? And that's a whole idea around about writing and doing some drawings. So can you think a little bit creatively about how you can overcome some challenges? How can you overcome that challenge about organising your day, about time organisation, about anything else that you can put in? And can you start to build your own coping strategy throughout writing it down and using these comic book characters to create your own comic book character or to create your own coping strategies that you can have in your own little folder and use as you go on, and share them with as many people as you possibly can. Because the more people understand how you learn, will then be able to kind of go and do that. And of course, this was the big one when we were doing it. Anytime I went out, particularly in probably early days of doing a lot of things, people would always say, well, what is dyslexia? And you go, oh, it's neurological, oh, it's a learning, oh, it's 1 in 10 in the population. And you just kind of stumble across some words. And a lot of young people hate the word. One, it's the hardest word to spell in the world. So that's really good. You give dyslexic people a really complicated word to spell, which I think's quite evil. But then the idea behind this was, well, could we come up with something that actually we could point at and we can say that's dyslexia? So what we wanted to try and do with this particular character was to say, you're not going to win. You can't defeat dyslexia. Just don't think that way. Don't reprogram your head to think, I can't beat dyslexia. But what I can do is I can take the noise down, or I can defeat the parts if I have the right coping strategies. So these are the things that a lot of young people said to us. Dyslexia, well, I'm easily distracted. I might struggle to organise my time. I might hear things and I might not take the full information in. So we had that, and that was why we came up with this this particular character, Mr. Despicability, or Mr. D, because it's much easier for me to say. And the whole idea, and I remember the very first workshop we did, and we put that up, and this young girl went, that's dyslexia, that's it. That evil person up there is dyslexia. And the reason was you could see it. You could see it. This was this little evil person kicking about, taking your pencil, stealing your time, stealing the letters out your word, moving the words round about. But if you've got something you can point at, you can then defeat. If you don't have something you point at, you can't defeat. And it's really important, we felt, that you had that person, because if you can write down the things that you can defeat, you can then move forward. So the final bit that we always talk about is this little bit of having a mission. So if you think about it, walking your way through, you've got a whole bits of resource in here about what is dyslexia, what does it mean to you, what are the challenges, more importantly, what are your strengths, starting to write them down, and then coming up with a little bit of a mission. So when we talk about it, what I always suggest to everybody doing this, it's about creating your own character. It's about creating something that will help you defeat Mr. D. You're not going to beat him, but you're going to maybe be able to bring that down. So yes, you're going to fall sometimes, and that's entirely fine. And that might be you've not organised your day well enough, or you've not thought something through, or you've not brought your coping strategy, which might be you breaking up your words. How can you then put that into being your own either comic book series? So you've got to start to think, well, my day would be this. This is how I cope with doing maths. This is how I cope with my day. I have my part in here. I think about it here. I have my bag here. I've got my colour coordinated here. I've got my visor here. I've got my overlay here. I've got my pen here, so on and so forth. And when we talk about powers, yes, some of them will be magical that the young people will come up with. They might be so harebrained, but when you start to break them down, they don't. So I'll go back to my young girl who thought about she could stop time. And in fact, she could stop time. She could. She'd come up with a brilliant coping strategy to be able to freeze time in her own mind. And the most important bit with that is that dyslexia was getting on top of her. Mr. D was getting bigger. He was making her more anxious, and she paused it. And she managed to squeeze him down, take the anxiety away, breathe, and go again. And that is so important. And if you've got that written down as a coping strategy, you know when that bit comes up, she knew to hit that watch. Hits the watch, pauses, calms down, moves forward. And it's more about learning that bit about that bit in terms of how we take these things forward. And how do we keep thinking about that in terms of every aspect that's a challenge with dyslexia? And again, I go back to that. If you write down the challenges, and then in every bit there that you see on the right-hand side, there is parts in there that is roundabout. So you probably see that they all relate. So the ones you see on the right-hand side, that is Wilforce's tail. So the idea behind that is, well, that's what Wilforce would do. So that's my bit of coping strategy. And you can see there's parts where they can fill in there and say, reading would be easier if. You can cut that out. You can keep that. You might give that to your trusted adult. You might keep that yourself. Whatever way you do it. And now you've got something written down that is yours. You know how to do it. You know how to have a coping strategy, and it just allows you to breathe. But it's about breaking down the barriers for everybody. And they're not easy to say sometimes, because you might think, do you know something? I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want to be the child that's embarrassed reading in the class. But if you've got your own coping strategy and you think about how you could do it, then that helps, and you can start to tick these things off. What we always recommend is looking at the comic book strip it's there, and then start to think, well, how could I do my own? And then maybe I'll create my own wee 3-part comic book strip that would then talk me through how I can kind of go forward and do that. So I might write down in my day, if I'm going to worry about time, here's my 4 things that I'm going to do. And my comic book character is going to talk to that comic book character, and they can take it out and they can read it and they can think, right, that's it. And the reason it's so visual is that doesn't allow the words. Hence why a lot of children relate to comic books, because they can put the things together quicker by looking at the visuals as opposed to the words. And we've seen that with Beano, with Dogman, with any of these other kind of things that relate very much to being able to get through things without having to panic about all the words in there. I can look at the image. So if I can take it out and I can look at the images, then I can bring that thing forward and it'll help me with my learning. And I go back to then you have all these, and each one of these is downloadable. So if you think about it, you can start with one that's pre-done for you, move it on to your own. And again, you don't need to draw in the book. You can then download and start to use them as everything you can kind of go and do. So I've nearly kept you time again, Lena, because there's only 2 more slides, which is really remarkable for me as normal. But the next bit there is about that, just that raising awareness. So what I've always said is there's a bit of a pledge. I'm always kind of saying to people, well, what's the most positive thing your school can do to raise awareness about dyslexia? One, you've done brilliant. You're on this call today. So that's hugely thank you to each and every one of you, because you'll have made a difference. You've made a difference today to a young person's life. You'll have changed it simply by coming on this call, and we can't thank you enough for that. What more positive things can we do to make change? How can we make dyslexia inclusive in learning? So it's not what I had in the 70s and 80s, which where I was sat outside the class. How can we make that a bit much more inclusive? And how can we take this particular journey and start to think about that and open up that creativity? Hence why we always talk about the positivity. And then what are the 1-2 things you can make a real difference with? And I think that about the dyslexia champions that we've seen in some of the classes where they've got primary 7s and primary 6s to own their dyslexia. Because if you can do that, you start to get young people to say, do you know something? This is no different. It's just people look at the world a different way. And for a fact, that is the most important thing we can do. People have to look at the world a different way. If we don't have people doing that, we won't solve most of the problems we have in society. And most dyslexic people are so creative thinkers. We just need to unlock it. And a lot of that is built up with frustration. And if we can undo that bit of frustration to say, do you know something? I need a bit of help. Or do you know something? I think this is the answer. And you might have the answer, but you might just speak so quiet that you don't come up with the real thing. And if we didn't have dyslexic people in the world, well, we don't really have electricity. We don't really have a lot of the other things, because most of the inventors are dyslexic, because they think creatively, they think differently. And if we can open up that potential, we open up such an amazing world. But more importantly, we just make the well-being of young people far better, which is so, so important. So again, I go back to how can you raise awareness, and what's the most positive way you've heard about raising it? And just think about that. And hopefully you've got some things that are in there. I'm going to leave you with this last one in here that I've just about managed to stay on time, which is great. And this is the end of the book when we put this in. And when you look at this drawing, it's so brilliant by Rossi. You can see dyslexia as that shadow. You haven't defeated it. It'll always be there, but you can kind of just squash it down and keep it in your back. And if you look really closely, you can see the 3 comic book characters in the rucksack. They're there. They're your support mechanism. They're your coping strategy. They'll always be with you. You'll always be able to count on them. And my daughter always said, you've got to head towards a rainbow, Dad. You've got to head towards a rainbow because it's bright and it's beautiful, but you've got this. It's so, so important that you're heading in a destination that's bright and beautiful. And that's what we do. We give them that chance. And if you look at the pavement there, there's things in there that if we can give this to young people, then they will believe in themselves. They'll ask for help. They'll be creative. They'll look for teamwork. They'll be prepared, which is really important to get in them. And they'll focus on the hard work. And if we do all that, they get to the bottom of the rainbow, they get their own wee pocket of gold, and they just become so, so amazingly brilliant. And that's it. And it's as simple as that. And hopefully, I've not bored you too much, and I'll kind of just stop there, Lena, if that's okay.